Hey, happy Thursday morning, everyone. Welcome to our Minnesota History reading session for today. We are going to be starting the reading today with pages 2 through 9 from your ebook. Just some reminders for the week. Make sure you have your activity and quiz submitted, as well as your exit ticket quiz from yesterday. Today you'll have a reading checkpoint, and tomorrow you'll have a reading checkpoint as well. And we will hold our reading session tomorrow as normal. That's optional, but hope to see some of you there. So log into your ebook if you have not done so already. Log in like such. Here it is, Chapter 17, Cold War, Warm Kitchens. As a reminder, please be taking notes. We'll have our final note submission I believe it's May 24th, so it'll be here before you know it, and you can submit notes early if you would like to do so and check that off your list. Today's reading checkpoint the question is, why were suburbs growing so quickly after World War I? So that's something that we'll want to look for and think about as we are reading. We can also take some notes as well, which I will pause for here. All right, so let's get into the reading. Cold War, Warm Kitchens. So your look for items: what caused the Cold War to begin? How did the end of World War II play a role in the growth of the suburbs? And who was Betty Crocker? What was the purpose of building a fallout shelter? And why did the United States get involved in wars in Korea and Vietnam? So some things to think about and some key terms here: communism, capitalism. If you were at yesterday's Class Connect, we went through those quite a bit, so I encourage you to review that if you're still unsure about those terms. Superpower, Cold War, veteran, suburb, and Vietnam War. So all key terms that you'll want to be comfortable with and familiarize yourself with and be able to define or explain by the end of this chapter. All right, so page 3 here. Again, here is the timeline that I encourage you to check out sometime. Let's get into the reading here. Excuse me. When World War II ended in 1945, many Minnesotans were looking forward to better times, to peace and prosperity. They dreamed of a post-war world in which they could feel safe and secure. It turned out, however, that another kind of war was just beginning. In many ways, the post-war world was less secure than ever. America's former ally, the Soviet Union, was a communist nation. It was using military force to spread communism to other countries. Communism is based on the belief that the best society is one in which all property is held in common. This system allows everyone to receive an equal share of their nation's goods and wealth. The economic markets are controlled by the government. It sets the prices for all goods and services. Many Americans, including many Minnesotans, were afraid that communism would spread to the United States. They feared that communism threatened the American ideal of capitalism. This system is based on the belief that the best society is one in which individuals can own property and businesses. This system enables individuals to increase their personal wealth. In a capitalist system, the economic markets operate by free competition between buyers and sellers. The government does not set prices, but it does sometimes regulate or make rules in order to protect the public's best interests. Capitalism and communism were very different economic and political systems. This meant that the United States and the Soviet Union stood on opposite sides. Although they never fought each other directly in war, the United States and the Soviet Union competed against one another in different ways. They battled for control of the post-war world. Both countries built up strong militaries. Both tried to reach outer space first. Both attempted to convince as many countries as possible that their way of life was superior. So yesterday we discussed the difference between capitalism and communism and how that led to conflict between the Soviet Union and the United States. So here we have our definitions of communism and capitalism. If you look in your notes, you will want to plug in these definitions here. So it says fill in the chart below with at least 2 details about each of these economic systems. So communism and capitalism. So if we go to our reading, communism, an economic system in which property and businesses are owned by the government for the benefit of all citizens. So you could put that in, government owned. Capitalism, an economic system in which property and businesses are privately owned. So you can add to your notes as much as you'd like, but think of communism as government owned and capitalism as privately owned. Okay, and you could add other things in there as well from this reading. I encourage you to plug a few more things in there, but just to give you an idea of what to look for in your notes. Okay, frozen in a deadlock. The Cold War dominated world events for most of the second half of the 20th century. This simmering and dangerous standoff featured two superpowers, the United States and the Soviet Union. Each feared the other as an enemy that wanted to take over the world. The United States and the Soviet Union had been reluctant allies during World War II, but their alliance did not last. After the war, the Soviets installed communist governments in many Eastern European countries. Soon, Europe was effectively split in two. On one side stood the United States and its allies in Western Europe and Canada. On the other side stood the Soviet Union and its communist allies in Eastern Europe. Each side sought alliances with other countries and built up armies to protect itself from the other side. By the 1950s, both sides were stockpiling nuclear weapons many times more powerful than the ones dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. That's a terrifying thought. Several times over the years, the United States and the Soviet Union came close to going to war. Each time, however, they stepped back. Instead, the two Cold War rivals fought each other indirectly. Okay, so Cold War, the two rivals, the U.S. and the Soviet Union, fought each other indirectly by taking part in wars involving smaller, less powerful nations. We'll get to that in a moment. All right, so some more definitions here. A superpower is a country with very great political and military power, which may be used to influence the actions of other countries. So after World War II, the United States and the Soviet Union evolved as these two superpowers. And the Cold War is the intense political conflict between the United States and the Soviet Union, lasting from 1945 to 1991. So the end of World War II all the way until 1991. Okay, so what was the Cold War? We have that as well in our reading. So again, that intense political conflict. So you could essentially type that in, political conflict between the U.S. and the Soviet Union, right? Whoops. So you can plug that in. You get the idea. Next, we're looking for the growth of suburbs and so forth. Let's return to our reading here. Okay, so in 1949, 4 years after the United States dropped 2 atomic bombs on Japan, the Soviet Union exploded its own atomic bomb to test the bomb's abilities. Soon the Americans and the Soviets were threatening each other with nuclear weapons. They did this even though they knew a nuclear war could destroy the Earth. So it just doesn't make sense, right? They're testing nuclear weapons, threatening each other with nuclear weapons, even though they knew that it would basically not end well for either side. This standoff between the world's two most powerful nations became known as the Cold War. Like most American wars, this conflict played out both overseas and at home. The Cold War at home. As the sense of fear brought on by the Cold War grew more intense, many Minnesotans responded by trying to build cocoons of safety around themselves. They got married in record numbers, had children, and moved into comfortable new homes, if they could find homes. All right, which leads us to our next topic. Here are some photos for you to check out, some toys from the 1950s. It's talking about how toys often reflect current events. So here you can see a nuclear submarine kit, and this is this game Diplomacy. It's popular during the Cold War. They would the object of this game is to form alliances and take control of other cities. Here's a bank, but you can see it's a launch right to the moon. More space race cards here. Atomic flash toy gun. Junior baking book from Betty Crocker. We'll get into Betty Crocker a bit more. Sewing kit. It says one belief during the Cold War was that women should work at home caring full-time for their families. And we're back to the beginning. All right, so back to this here, and we're on page 6 here. All right, so Minnesota, like the rest of the country, faced a major housing shortage as thousands of World War II veteran soldiers returned home. These veterans were ready to start new families, which pushed the demand for homes to an all-time high. Many Americans made do during the shortage by moving in with friends or relatives or by living in cramped apartments. Adding to the house demand was a government program called the GI Bill of Rights. The GI Bill rewarded veterans by paying for their college education and by helping them get the loans they needed to buy their first homes. Without the GI Bill, many veterans would have considered becoming homeowners. New homes were needed. The question was, who would build them? Okay, so we had a term up here, veteran. A veteran is a person who has served in the armed forces, especially someone who has fought in a war. So after World War II, many veterans are coming home and settling down, many wanting to buy homes. All right, let's read more about the GI Bill of Rights. U.S. lawmakers realized that the returning veterans would need help settling back into civilian life after the war. In 1944, before World War II ended, the federal government had passed the GI Bill of Rights. GI is slang term for a member of the U.S. Armed Forces. It stands for government issue, which describes the equipment the military gives to soldiers. So, hence the GI in the GI Bill. Through the GI Bill, the government helped veterans who wished to finish high school, go to college, start a business or a farm, or purchase a home. Assisting veterans was not the only reason for the GI Bill, though. The production of wartime goods during World War II had lifted the nation out of the Great Depression. No one was sure what the end of the war would mean for the economy. The federal government was concerned that the nation might slip back into an economic depression. By offering affordable loans to buy homes and start businesses, the government hoped to maintain the good economic times the war had brought on. All right, so here we are talking about suburbs a bit. So who is going to build new homes for these veterans returning, veterans that have maybe some money from the GI Bill to spend? So that person was Orrin Thompson. Orrin Thompson was a farm boy at heart. He grew up on a family farm near Barrett in western Minnesota. He later told people he probably would have become a farmer himself if it hadn't been for the Great Depression. Instead, he left the farm to look for work. He became an electrician and found jobs in several Midwestern factories during World War II. When the war ended, Thompson started thinking about another line of work, building homes. Thompson saw an opportunity. I got intrigued, he said. People were just looking for shelter, for a roof over their heads. Thompson decided to build houses, but not just any houses. They had to be affordable and plentiful. Thompson's plan was simple. He would keep prices low by building this house on the cheaper land located outside of the main cities, and by using the same design over and over again. With this system, he could build dozens of houses in a matter of months. Thompson built his first homes in South Minneapolis, near the site of the Minneapolis-St. Paul International Airport. At that time, the area was more country than city. One day, a young couple came to look at a home that Thompson had built and joked about how far from the downtown area it was. "Do you get a cow with a house?" they asked. So here is Richfield. If you're familiar with Richfield, it's near the Minneapolis St. Paul Airport. So in Richfield in 1954, cows and cars competed for space. As the suburbs expanded, they took over thousands of acres of highly productive farmland. What might this land have looked like 10 years before this photograph was taken? Well, the houses probably wouldn't be there, right? And so how do you think this area looks today? Well, here's an aerial view of it. If you are familiar with this area, so right there's 62 and Penn, right? So there it is from Google Earth. So it looks a little bit different yet today as well. Probably not going to see any cows in that area. Okay, so let's see here. As more and more cars traveled, the road service stations became more common. Teenagers drove cars and worked as attendants at service stations. And here is the definition of suburb: a community in an area surrounding an urban city. Soon Thompson's company was buying up large pieces of land even farther away from the twin cities of Minneapolis and St. Paul and building entire neighborhoods on them. People called these communities suburbs because they were built just outside the urban twin cities. Each house looked almost identical to the one next door. In the words of one company official, Orrin Thompson's homes came in 3 colors: white, white, or white. All right, so